Starting Daniel 1, we're going to be in verse 3. And if you, just a little catch up on this series, the Babylonians would capture people from various nations, and their philosophy was subjugation through assimilation. They would bring the best of the best from wherever they'd conquered to Babylon, and they would brainwash them, and they would teach them the Epic of Gilgamesh. They would teach them about their gods and goddesses. They would teach them their Chaldean language. They had a system in place to make sure that all the Jerusalem or wherever they conquered you from was going to get off of you, and Babylon was going to get on you and in you. And this is what's happening for Daniel. And these are teenage kids, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and they get captured, and now it was the take the best, leave the rest philosophy. Here they are in Babylon looking around going, what in the world? This is the freak parade in Babylon, and here we are. Verse 3 of Daniel 1. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials. So Ashpenaz's job is, I'm the guy who's going to do the brainwashing of these Israelite teenagers, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. So you catch that, it's at the very start of the story. These kids conquered from Babylon, these Hebrew teenagers, they're kings' sons and daughters, they're nobles, that's who they are. And here they are, they were elites in their homeland, but now they're just prisoners in Babylon. In verse 4 it says, they were young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. And Ashpenaz, his job was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. You probably learned some of that along the way in school. Chaldean, Epic of Gilgamesh, Marduk, who gets slayed, and the whole world's built on his tail. Fun Mother's Day reading, in case you're looking for something. The Epic of Gilgamesh. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were trained for 3 years. And after that, they were to enter into the king's service. And I love this. It says, among those who were chosen from Judah, or the northern kingdom of Israel, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And they may sound unfamiliar to you, but they're actually very familiar because we looked at their story last week. They were just renamed. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, he said, you're not Daniel anymore. Your new name is Belshazzar. To Hananiah, you are Shadrach. To Mishael, you are Meshach. And to Azariah, you are Abednego. And it says, verse 8, but Daniel, he's been renamed. Now he's Belshazzar, has resolved. And a lot of translations there will read purposed in his heart. And I love that. If you have a KJV or New American Standard, it'll say purposed in his heart. Daniel purposed in his heart not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official, Ashpenaz, for permission not to defile himself in this way. And so I love this. A couple things happen at the very start of their Babylonian journey. The first is they come into the king's quarters and they're given new names. And we kind of read that and go, well, okay, they called him Belshazzar, they called him Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In fact, that's kind of how we refer to the story. But these names were not just sort of passive, here's your new Babylonian name, you were Tony, now you're Tiger, I don't know. They're not like the just standard Babylonian names. The new names are actually a slap in the face to their Hebrew heritage. And the name Daniel, that name means God is my judge. If your name's Dan here, or Danny, you didn't know that, congratulations, God is your judge. God is my judge is what the name Daniel means, and especially in Hebrew, this is still true today. When somebody gets a name, that it means something, and there's some heritage attached to that. Well, for the Hebrew people, the name Daniel, popular name, but it meant God is my judge. And the name Belshazzar, the name they gave him, was a name, and it kind of loses. You kind of get lost in the translation from Chaldean to Hebrew to Greek to the English, but it means Bel is my commander, and Bel was one of the Babylonian gods. And so when they said that, they were telling him, a big slap in the face, look, Daniel, I know you come from a place where you believe Yahweh, God is your judge, but I'm telling you in Babylon, that's not true anymore. Bel is your commander. And somehow, and that was true for Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, these new names were all ways of being subversive to their Hebrew heritage. And they were a slap in their face. And they said, look, call us what you want, but I love Daniel. He says, I'm putting some rocks down, And I've purposed in my heart, and I decided before I ever got to the shores of Babylon who I'm going to be, because I know that God is my judge. Call me whatever you want. And so that's what Daniel does. And what the other exiles do is not what Daniel does. You get the sense when you read through the scriptures that the other Hebrew slaves and those who've been captured are not as strong. They have not purposed in their heart to follow God. In fact, you read this in Psalm chapter 1, or Psalm 137, verse 1. It says, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for our captors, the Babylonians, asked us to sing songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. And they said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? They said. So you have those that get to Babylon and they are so crushed and their heart is so broken and they're looking around and they're going, our temple's in ruin, our wall's been knocked down, we've been dragged off to live in a place where they worship Bel and they worship Marduk, and Yahweh does not seem to have any footing in Babylon, and we can't even get ourselves to sing a song to our God while we're in Babylon. We're so heartbroken and crushed. And Daniel says, not so with me. There may be those from my youth group days back in Jerusalem who got here and they can't get themselves to sing a song to God, but I'm telling you, they can call me whatever they want. They can call me Belshazzar. I've set some rocks down. I've purposed in my heart that no matter what happens to me, God is my judge, and I'm going to follow him all the days of my life, even if the rest of my days are in Babylon. Because I set some rocks down. I know who I am. And you go, well, how does he have the confidence to do that? He's 16, 17, 18 years old. And I mean, you remember, going off to college and all of a sudden you were experiencing new things and you joined a new fraternity and, you were, hanging out with your bros back in your hometown. And then you all of a sudden were, freshman at whatever university and you were a part of the Kappa Gadea fraternity, whatever it was. And you're now, that one takes a second, but when you get it, it's kind of funny. And you're going, man, that was a struggle. And it took you years maybe to recover and get back to some rocks being set down in your life to go, I don't want to live that way. But these guys, they have this ability to, day one, say, I've already decided who I'm going to be. I've purposed in my heart. And the reason for that, you go back to the first sentence of Daniel, it says they were the king's nobles' kids. And that meant that they had grown up in the house of Josiah. Josiah, if you go back to 2 Kings 22, 23, he was one of the iconic kings of Israel. And he was one of the kings that in the days where culture was starting to shift, they were trying to figure out as the people of God, are we going to follow God or are we going to just do what we want? And Josiah was the king that reformed the law. He rebuilt the temple. He was the king who, they had watched Josiah set some rocks down. Priests that had been ungodly, Josiah was the first one to get rid of them. And they had grown up in Josiah's house. And so when they got to Babylon and they got squeezed, I don't know if they had WWJD, what would Josiah do, bracelets or how it worked, but they had seen Josiah set some rocks down. And they knew in Josiah's house that you followed the Lord. That was not a question. And it didn't matter what names you got called. It didn't matter what happened. You were going to put rocks down. And when they were squeezed, that upbringing came out of them. Maybe for you, maybe for me today as moms, as dads, as a church that's devoting ourselves more and more to the next generation of raising up on the other side of this wall young men and women that walk into their schools, walk into the hallways of colleges and say, we're going to follow our God no matter what happens in Babylon. Are your sons and daughters being raised in Josiah's house right now? And you're like, well, I don't know. We watch Netflix and we're kind of like normal people. Are they watching you set some rocks down in your own life and determining in your own heart who you're going to be? And it's not always so much what you say, it's what they're watching you do and determining, look, we may live in a culture where people do this and say this and act this way, and maybe they use those words, but we don't use those words. As for me and my house, we serve the Lord, and we've set some rocks down in this house and in this family. And when your sons and daughters watch you do that, it's powerful. It's powerful.